Hope and a future. Embracing God's plan for your life. Introduction. When life doesn't go as expected. Have you ever carefully planned out your life only to watch those plans fall apart? Perhaps you worked hard through college for the dream job, but the offer never came. Maybe you thought you'd found the one, but the relationship shattered your heart. We often whisper in those moments, "Why, God? I did everything right. Why is this happening?" It's hard to trust God's plan when life doesn't go as we expected. After all, trusting an unseen plan goes against our human desire for control and certainty. So why do we struggle to trust God's plan? One reason is that we fear the unknown. We love having a roadmap, the American dream of a steady career, a happy family, a house with a white picket fence. When detours come, and they will come, we feel shaken. We wonder if God really sees us or cares. We might even feel hurt or abandoned when prayers seem unanswered. Is God still in control, or am I just unlucky? We ask in our darkest nights. It's in these seasons of disappointment and confusion that we're tempted to give up or take matters into our own hands. But it's also in these very moments that God whispers through Scripture to trust Him. One of the most beloved verses offers us a beacon of hope when we can't see the way forward. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. This ancient promise speaks into our modern pain, inviting us to believe that even when our path twists and turns, God still has a purpose and a plan. For many of us, Jeremiah 29 verse 11 is a lifeline in hard times. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. But what did these words originally mean, and how can we trust them when life hurts? Understanding Jeremiah 29 verse 11 in context. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 is more than a pretty quote for coffee mugs. It's a profound promise given in a very dark context. God spoke these words through the prophet Jeremiah to the Jewish people living in exile. They had been forcibly removed from their homeland and carried off to Babylon. Imagine the despair. Everything familiar was gone, and they longed for an immediate rescue. In fact, a false prophet named Hananiah had been telling everyone that God would fix things in 2 years and bring them home soon. That message sounded enticing, but it was a lie. Instead, God's true message through Jeremiah was startling. Settle in, because you're going to be in Babylon for 70 years, Jeremiah 29 verses 4 to 10. Not the news they wanted. It's in this setting of confusion and disappointment that God says, "I have plans to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you hope and a future." In other words, God promised His people that their story wasn't over. There would be no quick fix, but there was a long-term plan. The exiles' present situation was hard, yet God was working behind the scenes for good. As one commentary explains, these words were spoken to people in the midst of hardship and suffering, who desperately desired an immediate rescue. God's response was not to pluck them out of the difficulty right away, but to assure them that He had a bigger plan in motion. He encouraged them to build homes, plant gardens, and seek the peace of the city they were in. In other words, keep living, even here, even now. God was not going to harm them. In fact, He was planning their restoration at the right time. They would have hope and a future, but it would unfold on God's timetable, not theirs. What does this mean for us today? It means that Jeremiah 29 verse 11 is not a promise that life will be easy or that problems will vanish overnight. Instead, it's a promise that God is always working for our good in the middle of our mess. Just as the exiled Israelites could take comfort that God hadn't abandoned them, we can take comfort that God hasn't abandoned you in your struggle. The verse assures us that no matter how chaotic or painful our current season is, God's intentions toward us are good. He sees beyond the present moment. As one modern theologian put it, Jeremiah 29 verse 11 reminds us that God can work through any situation to prosper us and give us hope. It might not be an immediate escape from the pain, but His plan will use even the hard times to build a future worth hoping for. And just as He promised the exiles, when we seek Him with all our hearts, we will find Him listening and present with us. Jeremiah 29 verses 12 to 13. Knowing the context makes this verse even more powerful. Far from a shallow slogan, it's God saying to you, "I see you. I know the plans I have for you. Trust me, even if you don't understand right now." But how do we trust that promise when we feel broken by life's twists? Sometimes it helps to hear a real story of someone who discovered God's plan in hindsight. Real-life story, from setback to hope. Let me share a modern-day example of how God's plans can surprise us. Meet Emily. Ever since she was a kid, Emily had a clear picture of her future. She would go to a great university, become a teacher, get married by 25, and have a family, her very own happily ever after. For a while, things seemed on track. She graduated college with honors and landed a teaching job straight out of school. But then life threw a curveball. In her second year of teaching, budget cuts eliminated her position. Out of the blue, she was laid off. Losing her dream job so early left her reeling. To make matters worse, around the same time a long-term relationship that she believed would lead to marriage came to a painful end. In a span of months, two of Emily's life dreams crumbled. She found herself unemployed, single, and living back at her parents' house, angry and confused. She remembers praying through tears, "God, why is this happening? I thought you had a plan for me. This doesn't feel like prospering at all." For a long while, Emily couldn't see anything good in her situation. She took a temporary job as a receptionist to make ends meet. It was humbling, and she felt far from her purpose. Yet, in that quiet season of waiting, something began to happen. With more free time, Emily started volunteering at an after-school program for underprivileged kids. What started as a way to fill time became a passion. She discovered that she loved working with teenagers, especially mentoring young girls who lacked mother figures. Before long, Emily had an opportunity to switch careers, not back into a school classroom as she expected, but into a youth counseling position with a nonprofit organization. It wasn't the plan she originally had, but she felt a spark of renewed purpose. She also reconnected with a college acquaintance at church who, as it turns out, shared her heart for ministry. Today he is her husband and partner in life and service. Looking back now, 5 years later, Emily is grateful that her life took a different route. "Losing that teaching job was devastating at the time," she says. "But if that hadn't happened, I would have never discovered the joy of the work I do now or the wonderful people I met along the way." She realizes God hadn't abandoned her at all. He was rerouting her. It reminds me of another story I once read, about a woman who also went through a turbulent youth and only later saw God's fingerprints all over it. In her reflection, she wrote, "As I look back, I see all the times that God was standing next to me. He always kept his promise to me, and he will always keep his promise, not just to me, but to you as well." In Emily's case, what felt like the end of her future was actually the beginning of a new chapter God had written for her. Her setbacks were setups for something greater. Stories like this remind us that God is often working behind the scenes, even when we can't see it. At our lowest point, when we think everything's falling apart, God may actually be putting pieces in place for a better future. Emily's journey turned her heartbreak into a testimony of hope. She discovered firsthand the truth of Jeremiah 29 verse 11, that God's plans are to give us hope and a future, even if the route there is not what we expected. Parable, the tapestry of God's plan. To better understand how God's plan unfolds over time, consider this simple illustration, a tapestry. Have you ever looked at the back of a beautiful tapestry or embroidered quilt? The back side is usually a tangled mess of threads. You see knots, loose ends, colors that don't seem to form any pattern. Frankly, it looks chaotic and ugly. If all you ever saw was the underside, you'd think the artist had no idea what they were doing. Life can feel like that, can't it? Day by day, in real time, things often look like a jumble of random events. We can't tell why one thread of hardship crosses another thread of joy. It's nothing more than a jumble of thread, tangled, frayed, occasionally knotted, and seemingly random. We look at the mess of a failed plan or a painful loss, and nothing really makes sense. It's no wonder people lose heart or question God when all they can see is the messy side of the tapestry. But things are not always what they seem. If you patiently wait and trust the artist, there comes a moment when the tapestry is flipped around to the front side. Then, all those crazy threads suddenly form a stunning picture. The colors blend into an image, the pattern becomes clear, and you see that what looked like chaos from one side was actually purposeful design from the other. In the same way, God is the master weaver of our lives. We are seeing life from the backside of the tapestry right now. We may get frustrated because it looks messy. Yet occasionally, God in his kindness gives us a little glimpse of his side. We catch a hint of how a hardship contributed to a greater good, or how a delay actually protected us from a worse outcome. That glimpse reminds us that there is an artist at work. As one author beautifully put it, likewise, occasionally God gives us a glimpse at what he is weaving into the fabric of our lives. That momentary peek at glory gives us the courage to soldier on, knowing that nothing happens by accident. Every experience, good or bad, is a thread that he uses to complete the picture. No thread of experience, good or bad, is wasted. The one weaving it together knows precisely what he is doing. Think about that. Not one moment of pain or one detour is wasted in God's loom. Just as a weaver incorporates dark strands to add depth to a beautiful tapestry, God can use our sorrows and failures to add depth and color to our story. One day, we believe, he will turn the tapestry around and we will see the full masterpiece he has been crafting. In the meantime, our job is to trust the weaver. When you feel in the dark, remember that God is skillfully threading all things together according to his perfect plan. Practical steps to trust God's plan in uncertainty. Knowing these truths in our heads is one thing, but living them out when we're anxious or discouraged is another. How can we trust God's plan in daily life, especially when we don't understand what he's doing? Here are some practical steps to help you lean into faith over fear. Pray honestly and surrender. Talk to God about your hopes, fears, and frustrations. Prayer is where you transfer the burden of your plans to him. You can say, God, I don't understand this, but I choose to trust you. Help me to trust your plan. Even Jesus, in the hardest moment, prayed, not my will, but yours be done. Surrender is an ongoing daily choice. Consider literally opening your hands while you pray as a symbol of releasing control. Recall God's faithfulness. Take time to remember how God has guided or provided for you in the past. Can you think of a time when something seemed bad, but later turned out for good? Write these moments down. Remembering past faithfulness builds present trust. In the Bible, David often recalled God's past deliverance when he faced new crises. Likewise, reflect on your own life or read testimonies of others, like Emily's story, to remind yourself that God does come through. This will give you hope that you'll see his goodness again. Immerse yourself in God's promises. Scripture is a powerful anchor when you feel unsure about the future. Memorize and meditate on verses that reinforce God's good plans. For example, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Romans 8 verse 28. When panic or doubts creep in, counter them by speaking God's promises out loud. Jeremiah 29 verse 11 itself is a great promise to cling to, but also verses like Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and he will direct your paths, can steady your heart. Consider placing these verses around your home, or set reminders on your phone, so you see them often. Take the next right step. Do your part. Trusting God's plan doesn't mean being passive. The exiled Israelites in Jeremiah 29 were told to build houses and plant gardens in Babylon while they waited. In the same way, ask yourself, what small step can I take today to move forward? It might be applying for a new job, reaching out to a friend for support, or simply getting out of bed and tackling the day's tasks with faith. Do what you can and leave the rest to God. Acting in obedience, even when you feel unsure, is a way of saying, God, I trust you with the outcome. Surround yourself with encouragement. Don't walk through uncertainty alone. Community is vital. Share your struggles with a trusted friend, pastor, or support group who can pray for you and remind you of truth when you're discouraged. Sometimes you need others to help you see the front side of the tapestry when you only see the mess. Also, fill your environment with encouragement. Listen to uplifting music, read books or devotionals about trusting God, and limit voices that fuel worry. Find an accountability partner for faith, someone who will regularly ask you, are you trusting God with that situation? And encourage you to keep trusting. Each of these steps can help strengthen your trust muscle. They are practical ways to live out the belief that God is in control and his plans for you are good. Remember, trusting God is a journey. Some days will be easier than others. When worry about the future starts to rise, intentionally pause and try one of the steps above. Over time, you'll find that your default response can shift from anxiety to peaceful confidence in God's care. Final challenge: place your future in God's hands. Just as a hand reaches toward the light of a new day, we're invited to reach out in faith and entrust our future to God. So here's my challenge to you. Dare to believe that God has a hope and a future for you, even if you can't see it right now. What would it look like to live with that kind of faith? It might mean letting go of that worry that keeps you up at night, or finally releasing that disappointment you've been carrying. It means choosing to say, God, I trust you. I know you love me, and your plans for me are good. This is not a one-time decision, but a daily posture of heart. When you wake up each morning, you can pray, "Lord, I place this day and my future in your hands. Guide me, and help me to trust you whatever happens." Imagine the freedom of living like that, no longer haunted by what-ifs, because you know God is writing your story. You can move forward with courage, try new things, and even face setbacks, because you're confident that God will never waste your pain or your waiting. He is for you, not against you. He's the same God who spoke hope to the exiles in Babylon, and he declares hope over your life today. Will you trust him with your story? Take a moment right now to reflect on one area of your life that you've been afraid to surrender. It could be your career, your health, your family, or a dream that hasn't happened yet. Pray over that area and release it to God's plan. Write down Jeremiah 29 verse 11 and put today's date next to it as a symbol that you're choosing trust. In the coming days, whenever anxiety creeps in, return to that verse and your commitment. Finally, I invite you to continue this journey of faith. If this message spoke to your heart, respond to it, share it with a friend who needs encouragement, or leave a comment/testimony of your own experience. Let's encourage each other in trusting God. Consider subscribing for more uplifting insights so you can keep building your faith. Step by step, with our eyes on Jesus, we will walk into the future with hope. Your story is safe in God's hands, now and always. So live boldly and expectantly, knowing that he who promised is faithful. Your hope and future are secure in him. Now it's your turn. Will you take that step of trust today? God knows the plans he has for you, and they are good. Let's embrace that promise together. Subscribe for more encouragement, share this message with someone who needs hope, and remember, the best is yet to come when you're walking in God's plan. Amen.